Have you ever imagined a single book that could be a complete guide to, well, everything? I'm not just talking about spirituality, but your family life, your work, how you manage your time, all of it. Well, that's what we're diving into today. A massive 1 million-word book from almost 400 years ago called The Christian Directory. It was written by a guy with a truly epic ambition.
And this quote, it tells you everything you need to know about the author Richard Baxter. You see, he wasn't just writing a book. No, he was trying to build a guide that would outlive him by centuries. He called it Preaching by the Press, a way to speak to generations he would never, ever meet. He saw the printed word as a way to make his life's work last forever.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get a handle on what this guide is actually for. Then we'll dig into Baxter's diagnosis of the human condition, what he thought was wrong with us. After that, we'll look at his prescription for a totally reoriented life, the practical toolkit he gives for everyday struggles, and finally, we'll see why his questions still hit so hard today. Okay, first up, a guide for life. The best way to think about the Christian Directory isn't as some dense, dusty old book. It's more like a field manual for the soul. Baxter's whole goal was to give plain, practical directions for pretty much any situation you could find yourself in.
So who was this for anyway? Baxter's really clear about this. He wasn't writing for academics or people who just wanted to argue. He was writing for regular, sincere folks, people who genuinely wanted to live a life with purpose but felt totally lost about how to actually do it. But why did anybody need a guide this huge in the first place? Well, this gets us to Baxter's diagnosis of the problem. He believed that before you can find the right path, you have to admit that you're lost. And for him, the big reason we need a guide is that our default setting is, well, it's to be completely off course.
So here's his core diagnosis. By default, we're all turned inward. Our natural instinct is to please ourselves, to chase after status, to get lost in temporary pleasures. In his mind, we are basically hardwired for distraction, constantly getting pulled away from what really matters. And what's so powerful here is just how starkly Baxter lays out the stakes. He's basically asking you to do the math. Are a few merry hours really worth the joys of heaven? Is some fancy outfit worth your very salvation? For him, these were just little lifestyle choices. They were huge, eternal trade-offs.
So if that's the disease, what's the cure? This brings us to Baxter's prescription. And it's not just about, following a new set of rules. It's about a complete and total reorientation of your entire life's purpose.
And this quote just says it all. I mean, that phrase, absolutely addicted to him, wow, that's powerful. It means a life where every single thing you do, every thought, every ambition is centered around pleasing God, not yourself. It's a radical flip from a self-centered life to a God-centered one.
So how on earth do you do that? Well, Baxter breaks it down into simple steps. One of his grand directions is this idea of self-resignation. And it's almost like a 17th century version of mindfulness. First, you have to really truly get that your life isn't just your own. Second, you learn to actually find joy in that fact. And third, you consciously agree to it, willingly lining up your will with God's.
Okay, this is where the book gets super practical. Baxter doesn't just hang out in the clouds of theology. He gets right down to the ground level and gives you a toolkit for fighting the everyday battles he believes are keeping you from living this reoriented life.
He sees life as this big cosmic struggle. And to help you fight, he first wants you to understand your enemy's moves. Now, for a 17th century guy like Baxter, the devil wasn't just a cartoon character. It was the name for every single force, both inside and out, that pulls you towards selfishness and away from your purpose.
So, to answer that, Baxter lays out the whole playbook. He says these forces will use worldly success to distract you, or bad company to pull you down. They might try to convince you that this whole holy life thing is just too hard, or the second you try to change, they'll scare you with what others might think. He even points out a really subtle one, pitting two good things against each other, like using your family duties as an excuse to neglect your spiritual life.
This table really just boils his entire worldview down to a simple cosmic choice. On one side, you have the methods of Christ, all aimed at what Baxter called holiness, getting your life aligned with its true purpose. On the other side, you have the methods of the tempter, all about deceiving you with short-term pleasures. For Baxter, every single choice you make, big or small, lands on one side of this chart.
And here's the kicker. This battle plays out in the tiny details of your day, especially in how you use your time. This piece of advice sounds like it was written yesterday, right? It's straight out of a modern productivity book. Baxter is saying that your time is this precious resource you've been given, and one day you'll have to answer for every single hour you wasted.
So finally, let's talk about why this book from the 1600s still matters. Because when you strip away the old-fashioned language, Baxter is wrestling with questions about purpose, distraction, and living an intentional life that feel incredibly familiar.
Just think about that for a second. This was all written more than 400 years ago. Long before smartphones, before social media, before Netflix. And yet his biggest worries about how to live a meaningful life in a world that's trying to distract you, they feel completely timeless.
I mean, listen to this. He was warning people back then not to waste their precious hours on plays and gaming. He saw them getting distracted and neglecting what he called their great work. It's not a big stretch to see the connection to our own anxieties about doom scrolling, binge watching, and all the digital noise today, is it?
And really, Baxter's entire 1,000,000-word project was his attempt to answer this very question for his time. And his work kind of forces us to ask it of ourselves today. In our own age of infinite, endless distraction, what does it actually mean to live an intentional life? And what's the great work that maybe we're neglecting?